Good morning, everyone. Just welcome all the panelists. We could ask you all to switch cameras on, that would be great. Great, one more, we're just waiting for Laura.
I am typically having camera issues, so I will be 2 seconds. I'll let you do your introduction.
Great, Laura, it's good just to know you're there. Right, good morning, everyone. It'd be nice to see you all if I could. And thank you for joining us at our second in our series of Meet the Networks webinars. This session is, as you know, an introduction to innovating in the UK. As many of you will know, the new 5-year price control period, known as RIIO-2, began in April this year for the gas distribution networks and the transmission operators, and will begin in 2023 for the distribution networks. So the aim of today's session is to provide innovators with both information and insight as to how innovation within the sector will develop over the next 5 years on our journey to net zero. We have well over 250 people on the call today, which really illustrates the interest, the engagement for innovators. So thank you all for joining us. If I could introduce the panel to you, we are going to start today with Laura Hutton. Laura is Senior Policy Analyst at Ofgem. We have then invited Mark Danton to join us, who is Senior Manager at NGN with a focus on hydrogen. And then Paul Gallagher, Head of Innovation at National Grid Electricity Transmission, and then Patrick Irwin, who's Policy and Markets Director for Northern Power Grid. And as you'll see, we have got then all the networks covered, so from transmission through to gas and electricity distribution. Usual rules apply for these things. We have a chat function. Unfortunately, given the numbers, we won't be able to invite people individually to speak, but we do have the chat function for you to use, which we'll be analysing. We do have a question and answer session at the end, and all the questions that have already been identified have come from innovators through a number of the EIC surveys. And so just before we get started, I just wanted to say today we are also launching, to support this innovating with the networks, the ultimate guide to innovating with UK energy networks. And we will provide you with the links at the end of this. And again, as a reminder, this is one in a series of webinars in Meeting the Networks. So if you do have any areas that following today's discussion that you would like us to do a deeper dive in with you, then do let us know and we can set webinars up with the guys and yourselves to discuss in more detail. So without further ado, if I can hand over to Laura, who is going to talk to us for 10 minutes. And we wanted to start with Laura because she will provide the regulatory context within which the networks are operating. Laura, can I hand over to you?
Yes, absolutely. And I now have camera. So hello. Hi, everyone. Great, thank you. So as Denise is saying, I'm a senior analyst in the networks price control team at Ofgem. I've been working in network innovation for 3 years now, predominantly working in the network innovation competition. So I'm going to give an overview of each of the funding mechanisms that's provided through the network price controls. That's not all that Ofgem provides. There's also non-monetary support through the innovation regulatory sandbox, where innovations can be trialled in a regulatory setting without the risk of necessarily failing. So if I can just move on to the next slide. I'm going to be covering the differences between RIIO-1 and RIIO-2 and where we are currently in each of these price controls and how they overlap. What we're expecting to see from RIIO-2 that we didn't see in RIIO-1, having a look at how this will change, how innovators work, and also a little about how Ofgem are aligning with other innovation funding providers. So on the next slide, we have essentially Ofgem regulates the energy networks with price controls. And since 2011, we've been using the RIIO model, which is a progression from basic ex-ante regulation, where networks were revealing efficiency gains by performing below preset price caps. We found that this resulted in cutting corners and worse outcomes for customers. So we introduced, in addition to ex-ante price setting, a range of incentives, one of which was the innovation stimulus package, which I've highlighted in yellow there. On the next slide, the basic objectives of innovation were as follows. We have incentivising innovation as core business. So although this was a funding incentive, we required the networks to contribute to a percentage of their own revenue towards that, to deliver financial benefits for network customers, funding new technologies that aren't business as usual, which should be funded elsewhere and could be funded comfortably elsewhere, to facilitate the transition to the low carbon economy. This is obviously far more important now than ever before, to encourage collaboration of companies and third parties. And again, I'll emphasise this a bit further later, and to facilitate the sharing of learning. So this has a lot to do with the treatment of IP and the treatment of the outputs of innovation that goes through the innovation mechanism. So on the next slide, we have a brief overview of sort of the different acronyms you'll hear, which I know the EIC have included a jargon buster in their guide. There's a lot of jargon. So essentially, RIIO-1 and RIIO-2 are currently running alongside each other. There's an overlap happening right now where transmission network companies and gas distribution moved on to RIIO-2. It began in April 2021. And electricity distribution companies will continue to be in RIIO-1 until April 2023. So there's 2 more years of the network innovation allowance for RIIO-1, while there's also a network innovation allowance running in RIIO-2. They have separate governance, but essentially it's building one on the other. So we also have the network innovation competition, which is still running in RIIO-1 for electricity distribution. We're currently in the initial screening process of that competition for ED projects. But in RIIO-2, we're going to be having the Strategic Innovation Fund. The governance for this isn't yet out for consultation, but we expect to have the first SIF bids coming in later in the year. These are sort of equivalents of each other, looking at sort of scale of project size. We also had in RIIO-1 the innovation rollout mechanism, and this was intended to fund that last bit before projects were rolled out, typically known to be a bit of a valley of death, where you've trialled an innovation to a point, have proved it works, but how to scale it, how to make it happen in reality tends to be a problem. We found that there wasn't huge uptake for the IRM, so it has been discontinued, but this has been supplemented by further incentives to transfer innovation to business as usual. So on the next slide, thanks. We have, and I've used RIIO-1 funding here just to give a context of sort of the scale of funding available. This was over the course of 8 years. So in RIIO-2, similar funding is available, slightly less on the basis of it being a 5-year price control rather than an 8-year price control. I believe it's in the region of 210 million to been made available to transmission and gas distribution sectors through the RIIO-2 NEA, but through RIIO-1, it's around 500 million that was made available, including electricity distribution. There's been over 1,000 projects in this space. There's a lot of activity, and it's entirely based on, or previously it was based on the size of the company's revenue. So there's been, RIIO-2 has been largely based on that, with some room for negotiation for smaller network companies as well. So significant spending in both areas, 350 million, 340 million, and a large number of large-scale projects coming through the NIC as well. I won't go into huge detail in the NIC today, just because I think I spend all my time talking about the NIC, and I'm happy to talk more about it if there are questions that come through. So on our next slide, we have sort of the principles behind the changes to RIIO-2 innovation, because I think RIIO-1 innovation was seen as a really positive success. We saw that the network companies were undertaking things that they wouldn't have dreamt of doing at the start of RIIO-1. There was a significant change in innovation activity. But we are conscious that the push for net zero is pressing even harder now than ever before. And there was a desire to plug some of the gaps that we were seeing in some of the issues. So here along the bottom, we have coordination, greater coordination with other innovation funding providers, largely because we see that network innovation was getting a steady stream of funding. We had a mechanism to award funding, and then we have difficulty funding things beyond the remit of the network companies. So when we're looking at innovations, we're looking at what's being plugged in at the end, and who's funding that innovation beyond the networks. So trying to make sure we're coordinating with other funding mechanisms and make sure that we're able to do end-to-end projects without having difficulties around the morality of network customers paying for that. And the balance of support is around focusing in on the key issues which need to be addressed in order to transition to net zero. We have allowed through the NEA a pretty broad spectrum of projects, just a set of eligibility requirements which they needed to tick off, but no prescriptive idea of exactly what types of projects were in and out. This has largely been followed again because there's an understanding that we as a regulator aren't going to know all the technical issues that will arise as a result of the energy transition. So there are a lot of technical niche things that might not be captured if we were to become prescriptive, but there is a stronger focus on key outputs that we're looking for. So a small movement towards that direction. And thirdly, the role of third parties. So core to all of this has been the desire to make sure that we're not locking out potential innovators in the design of our incentive. There's a recognition that the NIC is a very expensive funding mechanism to participate in, even before you guarantee that you're going to get funding. So there's been moves towards ensuring that that's in place and greater clarity around. Actually, it's probably best on my next slide. I can go into that a bit further. Thanks. So a very whistle-stop tour of the RIIO-2 NEA governance, which is now published. As I said before, we've got two sets of governance at the moment. So RIIO-1 NEA governance is for projects which were commissioned before the 1st of April. There's an allowance for carrying over projects which were already commenced for transmission and gas distribution, as well as all ED projects currently are operating under the RIIO-1 NEA governance. RIIO-2 NEA governance for transmission and gas distribution projects, which were started after the 1st of April. So we've made some changes along the lines of those principles raised in the previous slides. So amending project eligibility requirements to specify that we're also looking for projects that address issues faced by vulnerable consumers. Improved reporting requirements. We have greater visibility of the benefits the projects are producing, which we didn't necessarily have before because there were thousands of projects which we weren't closely tracking, and the reporting requirements were quite low. Also, for the sharing of learning, it's important that the learnings are visible to all so that they can carry those learnings forward into their own projects. Also, innovation process transparency for third parties. We're putting greater requirements on the networks to support the third parties they engage with. Essentially trying to make sure that we're allowing SMEs as well to come forward with good ideas where they're justified and they've got good ideas, not falling behind purely because they're unable to stand up to your major players in a competitive tender process. And lastly, further clarification on IP requirements. So clarifying the treatment of foreground and background IP, what you get to keep and what it's fair for network customers to get a discount on or to have ownership of if their money has developed it. So there's clarity around that. There's not been a huge change in that from RIIO-1. It's just trying to clarify and make sure that there isn't so much fear around the IP arrangements. So these are just a small number of changes in the RIIO NEA governance that I thought would be of interest to third-party innovators in particular. So in the next slide, this is a very quick overview of our progress in the CIF. I've said before, the CIF is not entirely comparable to the NIC because the NIC has a really big investment up front. The CIF is looking to do things on a more incremental basis so that there isn't such significant risk, both for project partners and for the network customers funding that innovation. So we can fail fast and we can try out a lot more things with this funding. And this is where our coordination with other organisations is going to come in more so. So there's a lot of discussion with BASE. The CEF is being developed with UKRI, and they're going to have a much bigger role in the NIC, or sorry, in the CEF. So, and also we've been in discussions with Ofwat. So discussions with Ofwat have largely been around data sharing, which we understand is absolutely fine for utilities to be sharing data where this can benefit the customers. But there's more progress to be made in this space. So yes, I think that's everything from me. I think at this point I will be handing over to the networks to be talking about the innovations they've been undertaking within this framework.
That's great. Thanks, Laura. That was a very clear whistle-stop tour. And as we've said, we can do further deep dives if people listening want to do deep dives. If you let us know, we can facilitate those through other webinars. We have got questions that have arisen out of your presentation, Laura, but we'll pick those up at the end. So I'd like to introduce Mark Danter, who is Senior Manager at NGN, who we wanted Mark to talk about hydrogen really in that space, because we hear a lot about it, but not so much about how innovators can engage really. So handing over to Mark.
Okay, thank you, Denise. Like most of the panelists, I could wax lyrical about the H21 programme of works, having been involved with it for over 4 years now. So I'll try and keep it brief, but there is more information available on the h21.green website that we've set up, which has got films and more details about the project. So yeah, it started about 4 years ago when we had a Leeds City Gate investigation paper that we did, and spun out of that we had the phase 1. We developed and put a bid in, which Laura's outlined on the NIC projects. So that was looking at background testing of assets, which in the right hand picture there you could see the test facility we built down at Buxton in the HSE's science division, where we recovered assets from the network and we tested if they leaked with methane, and then if they leaked with hydrogen, which we had some positive results that they didn't leak with hydrogen, but if they did leak with methane, then they leaked with the same expected ratio of hydrogen. So, we also did some work with DNV up at Spade Adam. We looked at consequence testing, so that looked at tracking dispersion, leakage, and that's where we had the 3 houses on the left-hand side picture built up there. So underneath the grass there, we've simulated potential leaks, and we've got sensors that track and monitor leakage. We also looked at explosion potential and ignition potential as well. And that all fed into a quantitative risk assessment that we updated for the one we hold for natural gas. So we're still working on that piece of work, which is moving into phase 2. So phase 1 launch is due later in May, which we're doing with ENA. Phase 2, which we're on with at the moment, is the middle picture at the bottom. So what we've done is extended the test facility at Spade Adam, and we've basically replicated a distribution network from the 7 bar down to low pressure, and we will be trying different network operations. So we've had HSE review the procedures we have, and looking where there's any issues with hydrogen, and we'll, as I say, be looking at the way we're looking at, can we still do our operations and maintenance the way we did natural gas with hydrogen as we move forward. We've also got an area of old network at Middlesbrough where we're trying, we've isolated it, and again we're going to be putting hydrogen in that network. So we'll be replicating a number of the experiments and testing we've done at Spade Adam in a real world environment, if you like, but it's isolated off the gas network. So all this is working towards a live trial, our phase 3, which we're currently in discussions with BEIS and Ofgem. So as Laura pointed out, this SIF funding, so which still, the network's still finding our feet with that new funding mechanisms, but hopefully we'll do that and get successful with that funding. Those are all large projects, they're NIC, which is probably not applicable for what we're discussing today, but a lot of smaller projects have spun out of the work that we're doing from these pieces of research projects. So there's a number of ways that we can engage with various different parties, third parties, to help us on this journey. So if you move on to slide, please, Liam. So that's just a bit of a background, a timeline of where we are. So we're currently in phase 2, as you can see, and we're working towards phase 3A and 3B. So the other work we've been doing, if you move on to the next slide, that'd be good, is we've got joint funding with Cadent and BEIS. So BEIS have had a piece of work running for several years, which is the High for Heat, where they've been looking downstream of the emergency control valve in the networks, so anything within the property. And what they've been doing is developing the new hydrogen flow meters, which you can see in the bottom right picture. They've been looking at various different appliances. So as you can see there, you've got a Baxi boiler, but there's the Worcester Bosch. But they've also been working with on fires, cookers, hobs, etc. So these houses we've had built at Low Thornley at Gateshead, we're using it as a demonstration piece. It's currently in commissioning at the moment and should be available for people to visit later in the year once the COVID restrictions have been lifted, which is another thing. So they've currently got boilers fitted, which run on hydrogen. They're hydrogen ready, and we'll be putting hydrogen fires, freestanding cookers and hob within both of those. So that's available to view. But we've, as part of that project, we've been working with EIC to help us with a hydrogen detector. So what we realized was, we've got CO monitors in properties, we've got smoke alarms, and what we wanted to do is look at a hydrogen detector that could detect small amounts of hydrogen potential within the property. So EIC has helped us, worked really well with that, running through an open invitation for innovators to put proposals forward, shortlisted them, we've interviewed, and we're running with the current company at the moment. It's not been without its challenges, particularly procurement, and I know that EIC are working quite hard on that to improve the route to engagement with innovators, because obviously we realise and appreciate some of these companies, or some of your companies, are small, so some of the challenges of working with a big company are not helpful. So I know that Denise and her team are looking at that going forward. We also do a lot of work with academia. So we've done a lot with Leeds Beckett Social Sciences. And again, you can see quite a bit of that work on our h21.green website, where we've been looking at perceptions of hydrogen with the general public. We're also working with Newcastle Uni up at the Low Thornley site. So at the site where we've got these two properties, we've got what we call integral. So we're looking at the electrical and gas innovation site, so working with them, and the other one, just going back to the work at Spade Adam, we're working closely with National Grid. So we've been developing a test facility for the distribution network below 7 bar, but National Grid have been developing one for the transmission and network and they've been working quite closely with Durham University as well. So that's a very quick whistle-stop tour of what we're doing in hydrogen.
Well, thanks, Mark. We will come back because there are questions again about how SMEs can get involved. You know, how will they know what the ideas, what the challenges? So we can get onto that in the Q&A. But I shall hand over now to Paul Gallagher, who's Head of Innovation at National Grid Electricity Transmission.
Well, hi everybody. As Denise says, I'm Paul Gallagher. I don't have any slides, so you get to look at me for the next few minutes. So it's an exciting time for us heading into a new price control. I think every new price control brings a new focus and a new things to look at, but particularly this one I think is probably the most transformative we've seen with respect to the focus now on the energy transition and achievement of net zero, and the game changer that really creates for what we need to do as a network. And in many ways that's a disruptor, and when you got a disruption, hopefully from disruption you see great innovation, and I think that's certainly where we are. The sort of energy transition issues have sort of shocked many of us out of our normal rhythms of life in a transmission network, and created new challenges for us, and hopefully that's where we are now in addressing those challenges. For us as a TO, electricity TO, there are huge numbers to think about in what can we do through our innovation to support that transition to the that energy transition, and a wide range of things that we are focusing on through this next price control. Enabling connections to our network, developing the capability of that network, digitization allow us better control and management of that network, thinking about how we want to operate in that new network configuration, the way that the energy transition will affect how our network is being used and what people need from us, the support for the whole system approaches, the thinking about how we not only decarbonize our own activities, which is a massive focus for us with things like SF6 and decarbonising our construction, but how do we support the whole transition to net zero through things like heat, transport, supporting industry and finding solutions with industry for allowing those to decarbonise as well. So those are some of the key themes that we are thinking about as we go into the price control. And what we really want to understand is, what are your ideas? How can you support us through that? And what can we do to continue to both engage with you, but suck in those great combination of ideas that you've all got out there that we can then apply. We've got great expertise across ENGET in running a transmission network, but much of that will be based around the expertise that we've grown over the last 20, 30, 40, 50 years. And actually some of that expertise absolutely needed in the future, but actually what we need is new ideas and new areas of expertise that allow us to make those transitions, to allow that huge change. So we are really focused on thinking about how we can work with you and how we can take your ideas and work with you to develop those ideas to really find innovative solutions that are quicker and cheaper for consumers, that allow us to make that transition, because the challenge ahead of us is huge. One of the big focus areas for this year for us is the commissioning and introduction of our Dside Innovation Centre. This was something that was came through an NIC scheme a number of years ago, partially funded through the NIC arrangements. That's due to go live later this year, taking a huge substation in the northwest of England, actually North Wales, actually. Careful what I say there. Just over the border into North Wales, and transforming that into a real life test centre with 6 different test areas, due to go live in October. This isn't a National Grid, well, it's a National Grid owned test centre, but actually we are going to be using that test centre to both take forward the kind of transformational innovations that we want to bring forward, that we're aware of, that we want to do in our network now, but also open to the other networks and open to other parties who want to utilise the unique facilities that Dside provides. So you know, that's another area we'd love to talk to you more about and get your ideas about how we can use the facilities and the capabilities that that centre will provide to really transform the energy picture in the UK. So that's a very whistle-stop tour of what we're thinking about in Get Tier.
That was perfect, Paul. Perfect timing and well recovered. As a woman from North Wales, well recovered that you said that Dside was in Wales. So.
It was slightly embarrassing because I was only there 3 days ago, so I should have realised where it was. So,
but thanks, Paul. So handing over now to Patrick for a Dino perspective.
I'm on mute. So thanks, Denise, and thanks everyone. Coming at the end of this, I thought maybe rather than talk very parochially, I'm going to go strategic and just briefly talk about 5 themes which I think are going to be important, not only for the next regulatory period, but actually in the run-ups to 2050. So the first one is decarbonisation. And if I look at a DNO perspective, what that means for us is we're going to see hundreds of thousands of new connections and hundreds of thousands of change connections as people incrementally put on new loads, things like heat pumps and electric vehicles and batteries. And coping with that's going to be a real challenge for us. So it's connecting, managing, optimizing those connections. I think that at the same time, we've got the challenges and opportunities to digitalization. And I think we might go into that in a bit more detail later, but for me, that's all about using computers and connectivity to help optimize the whole system, and I'll come to whole system in a second. Flexibility is going to be really important. There's a question in the Q&A about the level of network investment needed to deliver decarbonisation. It is enormous, but the way we're going to do this is we're going to use customer flexibility first to defer investment for as long as possible. And then when we do invest, we're going to invest in so that we only touch the network once, typically before 2050. So that strategy is going to be really important, but that means flexibility is a really important part of the plan. And as well as the things we always talk about flexibility, I think there's 2 things I'd stress. The first one is customer participation, making it possible for customers to participate in flexibility efficiently. Again, I think digitization talks to that. And then I think we tend to talk about technology in this sector, but I think behavioral economics and innovation about helping people make the transition to behaving in a different way is going to be really important. So the most difficult challenges we've got here are people, regulatory and commercial. They're not technical, I think. Then just standing on the shoulders of giants, whole system is going to be really important. So that's whole electricity system, yes, but it's also working across the networks, across sectors and across vectors to optimize. So that's the electricity network supporting the gas network when the gas network is short, and the other way around. So we think, and hydrogen's a really interesting technology there, which has the potential to help bridge the gap between the 2 most important energy vectors, you might argue. And then the last thing I'd say is vulnerable customers. Is it's really obvious to me that if we don't think and act really carefully, the wealthiest and the most well-engaged in society are going to benefit from the energy transition, and the poorer and less well-engaged won't. So we need to actively design in benefits for those people. And we've got a load of projects which are focused on that, but it will be a really important theme. And yes, it's important because of regulation, but thinking beyond that, it's just important in terms of the industry maintaining its social license to operate. And I'll stop there. You're on mute, Denise.
Yep, I'm back. Thanks, Patrick. Thanks to all our panelists. We'll move into question and answers now, but I just wanted to put out to the audience, really, for those that don't know, what you can do through the EIC is, for all the things the guys have talked about today, is if you've got questions, ideas, proposals, thoughts, the idea of the EIC is we provide a single gateway in, so you don't have to go around all the networks. You can come straight to us with any new ideas and proposals, and we'll help you develop those. Likewise, you'll see that all the challenges that the guys are talking about and their specific calls that they're looking for innovation can also be found on the EIC website. So just to pop that in your head, if there's any new people out there who don't know, before we move into questions. So we have had some questions through on the chat. So I just wanted to pick one up, Laura, with you, if that's all right, which has come through from Jill Noel. And it's quite interesting, through your conversation, you were saying about the removal of the IRM, and you did comment on that there were other incentives now that have been put in place. Could you just say a little bit more about the incentives that are in the new regulation to support deployment?
Yeah, absolutely. I think probably it's best to talk about it in the context of the issue that we have in trying to get innovation into business as usual. Sorry, I've got the chat up here. Essentially, the issue is adoption. We see a lot of different types of the same area of innovation coming through. There's a little bit of not invented here syndrome, where it needs to be trialed on individual networks. So there's not a great confidence between the networks that, unless they're all involved in the same project, we don't see very often, and I know it does happen, but we don't see very often all of the innovations being trialed through the innovation funding mechanism becoming business as usual. And that's not always because it was a bad idea, it's just because it's not been taken that bit forward. So it's not necessarily new, but it's pushing further in the direction of forcing business as usual innovation. So bringing innovation into the normal course of business, because the goalposts have moved. We talked before about, I think a good example would be in DPCR5, which was the preceding price control for electricity distribution. Active network management was the innovation of the day, and now we're seeing active network management happening in practice. It's taken over, it's taken over maybe 10 years. It's taken a really long time. It does take a really long time for it to become business as usual. But trying to promote bringing those things into business as usual by expecting the network companies to be doing those things sooner rather than later. And part of the journey towards that is having better visibility of what they have proven they can do, which is why we're trying to ask for better reporting. We want a clearer indication of the benefits that what they've proven can deliver to the networks. So it's a combination of things. It's moving the goalposts. It's asking for greater evidence of what the outputs of projects are, rather than just leaving it to the networks to decide whether they want to bring it into their business or not, and having more conversations about this, because most of all, we don't want to choose winners prematurely. I think there's a risk that we're choosing or narrowing down the options when perhaps having different approaches to the same problem could be an asset. We don't want to choose winners for the network companies, but we certainly want to have those conversations openly, and we want to have greater visibility of what the networks are capable of. So I hope that's answered it. Sorry, you're on mute, Denise.
Forgive me there. And just one quick one, really. It was you talked about the SIF, Strategic Innovation Fund, and how you changed it so it was more accessible for smaller businesses, smaller innovators. And you were saying that there was part of the governance, there would be greater support for smaller businesses in making applications. Can you provide any more information on that, or is it still in development?
So I believe my previous discussion was around the Network Innovation Allowance. So it was purely as part of the Network Innovation Allowance governance, which is published. There is greater requirement on, and as we're doing today, all the networks are here to talk to third-party innovators. So, the greater sort of standardization of the expectations on network companies, what they should be sharing with third-party innovators, and what they should be doing to support them. So that's clearer in the Network Innovation Allowance. Under the SIF, which is still under development, as I say, the governance is not yet out for consultation, so I can't say much on that just now. But the intention is that it's more around the monetary issue, because I know it's difficult to bring this money forward up front to hypothetically get funded for quite a large scale innovation project. So instead doing it on an iterative basis and failing fast.
Thanks, Laura. I'm just conscious there are a number of questions in the Q&A. Some are quite long. So what we will do is, if we don't get to your question today, we will certainly we'll work with the panelists to get some responses, and we will send it out to everyone if we have people's details. There's one specifically from Joseph Hayden, who's asking about the H21 project, Mark, and about whether you're working with DNOs on this, but exactly as Patrick had said about how the balancing out and how we can work together.
Let me go in first.
Okay. Yeah. Okay.
Just to make the point is, we're working really closely, particularly with NGM, but also some other GDNs. We're a partner on the Integral project, and we're also partnering on a project they've got in Winlayton, looking at rolling out hydrogen to a village. So we're instrumenting both our networks. So there's a lot of cross-vector collaboration, and we're also collaborating in developing our distribution future energy scenarios, so that we've got one set of scenarios between the gas and the electricity company. I think that's really important, and we've genuinely got an open mind about what the balance will be between hydrogen and electricity for some of these key sectors, and we think what's really important is to get the tool in the toolbox and then deploy it when it makes most sense.
Brilliant. Thanks, Patrick. But Mark, do you want to add anything?
I am aware that Wales and West are actually doing some work with their local DNO on this use of hydrogen for refueling facilities, etc. So they are working closely with that, and I think that's a big project that's about to start anytime soon. So I'm aware of that, but obviously Integral's a good example as well that Patrick gave.
It is a good point now. Thank you. Thanks. A question well made, really, about the collaboration that's going on across on the whole systems approach. So coming back to some earlier questions, one of the innovators often ask is, will the networks be open to more risky TRL innovation that may fail, or will the focus in RIIO-2 be on higher TRL innovation? Paul, can I ask, will you be able to respond?
Yeah, definitely. I think I definitely embrace failure. It's something I explain in my performance review every year. No, just be serious. I think if we only went for high TRL innovation, then we'd fail, wouldn't we? Really? I've said earlier that we're looking for radical solutions for difficult problems, and sometimes that needs to start at a very early research stage. And we aren't just innovating for the next 3 or 4 years and finding solutions that are for this price control. We're finding solutions that take us to a 0 2050 target. So absolutely, we want to be looking at innovations across that entire TRL range and taking risk. And that can sometimes feel a bit difficult, in both conversations internally within National Grid and sometimes with regulator or other parties. But if we don't take risk, we won't get to the really fundamental change that we really need to achieve. So yeah, absolutely, we want to see that happen.
Thanks, Paul. Now, guys, I've got quite a few questions I want to get through because they are questions that have been asked. So if I could ask you to bounce through these if possible. So Patrick, one of the questions is, in terms of innovation, will there be a move away from looking at return on investment as a primary benefit for innovation projects and looking to wider benefits on innovation on the road to net zero?
I hope so. So one of the themes which certainly I'm working really hard with Ofgem is getting off talking about decarbonisation at least cost and starting to talk about decarbonisation at best value. So what's obvious to, I think, to pretty much everyone on this call is that energy systems are interconnected. And if you just optimize one element of them, you get the answer wrong. A really good example is losses. If I look at my network, I want losses to go up massively in the next few years, because that means your network's been really well utilized. Long term, as I can see we'll bring losses back down again, but in the transition, losses will go up. But we still talk about losses as if they're a really bad thing. What they are is people using the network a lot. And then we, as a society, across the energy networks and across energy infrastructure, we're going to be investing a vast amount of money in the next few years. We need to get the maximum bang for the buck for that for society, across society. So that means looking at value overall. And that's one of the benefits of having these natural monopolies which are capable of taking a long-term view and capable of looking past the short term.
Thanks, Patrick. So building on that, I guess, Paul, to you, so smaller businesses say pace is a real struggle when they're working with big businesses like yourselves. So they were saying they can't afford to wait for months for feedback or longer as networks change their minds. How does the industry ensure that pace of projects works for all parties?
Yeah, I think that is a challenge, isn't it? You know, and I do recognise probably, you know, some accusations thrown and probably rightly that we take a long time and then we change our minds and just the inertia of all of the governance that we have to go through or have had to go through. So we're really trying to change that. We've signed up through the EIC to your charter, which or to our charter, shall we say, that really sort of defines what we're going to do differently to try and provide an environment that does allow more agility and faster movement on some of these projects. You know, I can't promise that everything will change overnight, but absolutely it's our aim for us. If we want to engage and have good relationships with innovators, large and small, and recognizing that you will all have your individual challenges. So yeah, absolutely, it's on our agenda to try and make that work much better.
Yeah, thanks. And just for those who don't know, this is the Industry and Innovator Charter that Paul has just alluded to. So in response to the surveys we had last year, we have the same challenges. The SMEs are saying these are still the issues, and they're the gnarly issues like procurement and others, and pace. So the industry, all the CEOs have signed up to a commitment to saying, yes, they're going to work together to actually eradicate, you know, the barriers to deployment of innovation, which is great news. Again, on our website, if you would like more information. So coming back to Laura. So innovation, we'd like it to happen quickly. Innovation can happen quickly. Adoption happens slowly. How can adoption into innovation be speeded up in large organizations that are in many ways regulated against risk and against innovation? Their words, not mine, but I'm happy to go with it.
To be honest, I feel like I'll be answering the same question as before, just going over the same issues we have of adoption. So yeah, I don't know what to say more than I've already covered when the difficulties we face in sort of bridging the valley of death. And if we push it as the regulator, we risk as much as we gain. So unless there's a really clear use case, such as pushing forward on things like requirements around flexibility, there's a lot of push there from the regulator. It's not always appropriate to do so, and I think with more technical issues, the networks are the experts in these areas. Where coordination is needed, the regulator steps in.
I'm really sorry because we're tight for time, so it would be good to have a discussion around that, but we have so many questions that people have posed. So if I keep pushing on, if that's okay. Mark, a colleague from academia has said he struggles to get through to network innovation teams to discuss possible innovations being developed. So you talked earlier that you do work with academia. So how can those who aren't currently working with the networks, how do they get in touch?
Well, ideally through yourselves. Would be the focal point to see who's best placed to do and link up with them. But we do have innovation managers. Each of the networks have that, and you know, I say you can contact via those innovation managers. But if they go to yourselves in the first instance, then you can create those links. We are keen to develop better links with academia because we're not being great at it.
Yeah, and we currently now we've linked up with, I think, gosh, I can't remember the name of COFTA, I think it is, but again, that's an academic innovation community. So we are working with the EICs, working with them. So all our calls are now going out through those. But likewise, there's one thing about us pushing calls and challenges out. But if you've got ideas, given particularly on what the guys have said today, then do bring them through to us. So Paul, back to you. Another guy has said smaller innovators, they struggle to meet the terms required by networks and the TO businesses when they're trying to, you know, work with you, even when their innovation may well address the issue the networks are facing. How do innovators overcome this?
I guess we're talking about things like liability insurance and those kind of things. Yeah. So again, I think I'd probably point a little bit to the charter point there, that we're trying to break down barriers because we recognise that limits our opportunities, and the more people we can do innovation with, the better, and the wider we can spread our network is really important to us. So what I would say is where those are creating real barriers for you, I think we just need to engage at an individual level and try and work through the challenges. We are updating our contractual our contracts and our processes for T2. We're just in the middle of near the end of completing that at this moment in time. As I say, we've signed up through the EIC charter and some of the work we're doing with the EIC on some of those contractual relationships. So I'm not saying we could wave a magic wand and some of them will disappear and it'll be perfect tomorrow, but I think we are really on that journey. And if there are specifics that are really challenging you, then come and talk to us. We want to talk to you, and we'll try and find mutually acceptable solutions that can deal with some of those specific problems.
That's one of the challenges we had for that hydrogen detector I talked about earlier, was insurances and getting all the networks to agree. So that charter will help, because a project that should have started 3 or 4 months ago took quite a while to get over the line because of as a small company that was an innovator, that was the biggest challenge they had, was overcoming some of the requirements that networks have, particularly for insurances.
Thanks, Mark. I'm glad we got there, albeit it took time. But hopefully, if we get,
we got there. Yeah, we did. Yeah.
So that's a positive, isn't it? There's a real example there where there was a challenge and we've worked together to try and find it through. So I think that's the case for all of this stuff. If we all believe that it's the right answer, then we need to find a solution that works for everyone.
Yeah.
And it'd be good to get things clear in the beginning as well, because some things came as a bit of surprise to them when we put a contract in front of them. So we've got work to do, to help them as well as help ourselves.
Yeah. Thank you. So conscious, guys, we do want to finish just before 11, because I know with these meetings, people tend to be bouncing into something else for an 11 o'clock start. So we are aiming to finish just before 11. So to that end, I've got 2 big questions to ask all of you really, which is, so the first one is, what is the appetite and ambition for the networks in innovation for RIIO-2 for the next 5 years? How do you feel the ambition is within your businesses?
Do you want me to go first?
Yeah, that'd be great.
I think the current ambition, particularly for net zero, is significantly higher than it was. We are keen, obviously, as gas networks, and I sit on a number of the base panels as well. The networks are keen to push things forward. And obviously, it's ambition that the government has set as well. So the new 2035. 78%, it's something that we're looking to generate new ways of working, particularly, as I said in the presentation, we won't be able to do certain things the same way as we did with natural gas. So we need to work quite quickly. We're looking at these live trials by 2024, 2025. So we have to work quite swiftly to get some of these new ideas and new things move forward.
Right, okay, that's a good question. So anybody else on the question about ambition? Quick answer on the ambition of your businesses.
What I'd say, Denise, is if we look at 2050, it's a massive challenge, and we are not going to do it without innovating across our businesses. So, and yes, there's some technical innovation, but I would just say a lot of this is going to be finding creative ways of pulling things together, working in collaborations. Kenny Cameron's made a really good point there, and I absolutely agree with it. So much of this is pulling these streams together and making it all work together. That's going to require collaboration. It's also going to require the regulator being a risk accepting, as well as companies and other industry participants.
Yeah, and just say there's another guy who's just raised a really good point, actually, which is a really interesting point, that he's put submissions into the EIC for consideration, and they've been turned down but been successful with Innovate UK. So we can go through, really happy to share it, because we are very transparent about how the opportunities as they come through are. We're very clear, again, in the ultimate guide, it will tell you how it's done. The EIC doesn't filter these things in isolation. It works alongside colleagues within the industry. And obviously the industry can only back innovation that they can see that there's a route to market for, or that it's going to add value. So I'm really happy to review that with anybody, and we can talk more about it, because it's a very interesting point. So sorry, coming back to the questions posed before. One of the big ones is, what is the opportunity for innovators in RIIO-2 and how do we get involved? And we'll start with Paul then.
Well, I think just reiterating the points we've made today, that that Patrick just said there. Really, we're not going to hit our government targets and our own targets without innovating. You know, the old solutions won't deliver this, and therefore I'd say the opportunities are huge, probably bigger than they've ever been, because the challenge is bigger than it's ever been. So we absolutely recognise we can't do business as usual and hit the outputs we need to achieve. We have to innovate in every area of both technology, but there's a great point from Patrick again, that it isn't just about technology solutions, it's about the process, it's about the way we collaborate, it's about ways of working, all those kind of things. We have to be innovative, not just thinking about whiz-bang technology solutions, but in innovation in every aspect of the whole system energy delivery, really. So yeah, I'd say greater than ever. Come and talk to us.
Right. We've had lots of things about relationship between the Eic and Ena, so we see the potential confusion there. Again, the ultimate guide should tell you, but the Eic is the broadly the voice of the networks, they call, so they are there to represent the networks. The thing about the Eic is we are very focused on innovators and challenging and working with the industry to shape their practice in order to allow smaller innovators through into the industry. So broadly speaking, there are differences, but there are overlaps. So we work in partnership with Ena very closely. So that's that one. And can I just ask Patrick and Mark, what do you see the greatest challenges for networks are in RIIO-2?
So I think the greatest challenge is making decarbonisation happen and making sure we're not the rate limiting step. But linked to that is making sure that the regulation keeps up with what we need to do in society. And I'm seeing Ofgem genuinely switching its thought processes towards decarbonisation being the critical driver. But I'm still seeing some quite old-fashioned behaviour within bits of a regulator, which are kind of trying to solve yesterday's problems. And that's going to be really, that dynamic is going to play out over the next year with the appeals for the gas transmission and gas distribution price controls. But what we really do need to do is make sure that the regulator is focused on decarbonisation, and that helps network companies, and particularly network companies' senior management team, focus on decarbonisation rather than fighting regulations.
Yeah. Thank you. Mark, any final comments?
Yeah, I agree with Patrick. It's not technology that's going to be the problem. Dealing with BEIS and obviously Ofgem, it's moving that story forward, and better communications with those parties. BEIS's ambition, the networks are trying to push harder than BEIS's ambition. And obviously, if we've got those clear lines on what we're doing with hydrogen, then we can move forward with the technical challenges that will need the innovation projects.
Right, and I suppose, thanks, Mark. We should allow Laura a comment in there then, Laura.
I don't want to scapegoat BEIS because they're not here, but absolutely similar area. I would say that a good example is heat. And I know you're saying technology is not going to be the problem, but I think the choice of technology is going to be a challenge, because we don't know the proportions of where this demand is going to land, whether it's going to be electricity or gas.
Right.
That's a huge challenge. We've got
Sorry, Laura, I'm going to have to cut you off because we're really coming right up to the end. So just without further ado, to thank everybody who's in the audience today. Thank you for taking the time to meet with the networks, with Patrick, Paul, from Laura from Ofgem, and Mark. As we said right at the beginning, this is an iterative process. The Eic is setting these up to answer the questions that you've got as innovators. So the next series, we've got a series of these webinars. Please do let us know and what you'd like to focus on in the next webinars. And of course, please refer to the ultimate guide which hopefully should answer many of the questions you would have before innovating with the networks. So thanks again for your time, guys, and look forward to seeing you again soon. Cheers now.
Everyone.
Okay,
Bye-bye.
thank you.